Hello and welcome to another episode of Good for Profit, the podcast where we speak with founders, entrepreneurs, ecosystem leaders who are building profitable businesses that are also good for the world, good for humanity as a whole. I'm your host, Mo, and we're very much trying to coin the term good for profit here at the podcast. So just like you have the not for profits, hopefully good for profits will be a term that also gets thrown around in the future. So help us on that mission, spread the word. Today's guest with us is Sara Roberts. Sara is the CEO at Healthy Nibbles. Healthy Nibbles is a company, sort of what it says on the tin. They provide healthy snacks and healthy nibbles for people instead of the crappy stuff that we usually get in vending machines in our workplaces and in hospitals and so on and so forth. They've been going from strength to strength. The company's been around for a little while now. It is a company that is involved with vending machines, logistics, actually the food and the snacks and everything, I think the food and beverage industry. So it touches on quite a few different industries, quite a few different areas. As you can imagine, there's a lot of challenges that come with that. And Sara goes into some detail around how she's dealt with some of those challenges, how she's gone around team building and so on. So very interesting, very insightful conversation. But we also got to dive deep into Sara's history. Her first thing ever was like one of the first sort of main gigs that she was working on was working with businesses out in Sub-Saharan Africa, and how the culture over there was functioning, how we had a lot of different types of people from different parts of the world coming together and forming businesses, and how they gave back to the community there as well was very interesting. And she's learned a lot of lessons from that she's brought on the way, as well as some other experiences. And now she's bringing all of that into Healthy Nibbles, who are now closing in on their Series A round, which is very exciting for her. But we also touch on, why she started the business and the story behind that. Sara's take on team building as well and choosing the right kind of investor are also quite interesting. So definitely look out for those. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that you'll enjoy it as much as I did. But before we dive in very quickly, as you can see, we're now doing things a little bit differently with Good for Profit. Previously, we were just doing audio formats. Now we're doing audio and video, and we're also going for slightly longer format. The reason why is because I found that in previous episodes that I'd recorded with other incredible guests, ones that went on for a bit longer, for sort of like just past the hour mark, were the ones that we usually managed to dive a bit deeper into getting to know the person behind the business. And I found that very rewarding for me, but also I'm sure it'll be rewarding for the listeners too. So decided we're going to go slightly longer format from now on. 2-3 hours, not really going to put a mark on it, but don't worry. For those who are tight for time, we'll also be releasing shorter snippets, summaries of the key bits, the key nuggets around whether it be raising funds or whether it be team building or whatever, so that people out there who are also building startups, whether they're startups that are good for profit or not, I'm sure they will benefit just as equally, and hopefully they'll be convinced to turn it into a good for profit business on the way. So without further ado, this introduction has been long enough as it is. So we'll get into the episode, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Sara Roberts. So, hello, Sara. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm really delighted to be here. Looking forward to having a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, likewise. It's this is actually our first ever one that's going to be video and audio. So something that people will love very much. Not to put you on the pressure or on the spot or anything. But no, it's I'm sure you're used to this now. I've seen that you've done quite a few podcasts in the past as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really just a really good opportunity to sort of like share the journey and all of those experiences that we all go through as founders.
Absolutely, and multiple time founder as well. So not only it's not your first time going through the founder journey, right?
No, it's not, but it's very, very different. The previous businesses have been very service driven. So
Okay.
the biggest challenge I find in that is if the business crashed, if your main client crashed, you can sort of essentially lick your wounds in a cafe and rebuild very easily. I think with this business, there are so many moving parts because you've got sort of logistics, we're developing a tech arm. So there's just so much going on all the time that it is a totally new experience in some ways. So yeah, each have their own quirks.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So yeah, with the service driven stuff, I've worked with service driven companies before and kind of service businesses, and I don't know which one I prefer. I think I would argue that I actually kind of prefer the startup side of things because it's a little bit more. It's definitely tougher. It's much harder. And like you said, with service driven stuff, you have the opportunity to go and pick up any new client at any point because kind of you know what you're delivering. But yeah, there's just so many. There are equally as many moving parts in some ways because there's people that need to be involved and actually deliver the service and get things done. And sometimes it can be tough to pick up the new clients.
Mm,
And if you're relying, and a lot of service businesses will have this problem where they're relying on a lot of their income from one or two main clients, and if one of those clients goes, then you know it can cause a lot of
yeah,
problems for them.
totally agree. So my previous businesses were very much connected to um, event management and brand insight. So brand
God.
semiotics, which is essentially how consumers create meaning with brands, what connects them emotionally to the very few brands that as individuals we actually connect ourselves to. Um, and yeah, there was always that dilemma, that excitement when you get a very large client, but equally so that threat that if they did move and you're at the various stages of growth, then essentially they could wipe out a significant portion of your revenue. So that is probably what I found the biggest challenge. It's also very people dominated. So being able to replicate what you're doing as an individual and try and make sure that the team around you have that same sort of DNA and approach to clients was crucially important. I built the business internationally as well, so we had all of those different dynamics. So it's based in Sub-Saharan Africa, which has lots of
Oh, very
different
interesting.
cultural
Oh,
differences.
of course.
So,
Which business was that?
sorry.
Which business was that?
So that's a was a brand agency called Visagy. So
Okay, very interesting. And is there noise, background noise, by the way? Or are you okay from my side? No, I think we're good.
I can't hear anything at this side.
Okay, awesome. There's a bit of background noise right now, and so yeah, I thought it might be from here. Um, I'm surprised at how amazing tech is these days because there's definitely quite a bit of noise happening right now that will go away very soon. So, it's Sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm actually originally Egyptian.
All right.
I was born in Egypt and I arrived to the UK when I was 12 years old on a boat. No, it's on a plane. This is part of my stand up sketch that I'm trying to practice. Uh, but no, I arrived. I actually came to the UK when I was 12 years old, and yeah, so I kind of grew up, spent most of my first years of my life between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, between the two. So I've got a fairly good understanding of the culture over there, and I do definitely understand that it's very different over there compared to here. Not as much anymore. Things are definitely changing and moving around in that way, but it probably would have been a bit more different as well, sort of a little bit further back in time. So what were some of the main challenges that you found, I suppose, like when you were kind of working across two very different sets of cultures like that?
So I think first and foremost, when we came to set the business up, we established the business in Nairobi.
Okay.
Um, and I think just in terms of setting a business up, it's very much based on you need to know the questions that you need to ask to get the answers. So, which
Okay.
can be a bit in a brand new culture. Um, so that was quite interesting. It took about 3 months to actually get the business set up over there. Interestingly, somebody said
Wow.
when sort of the businesses here know that you're not a 2 year wonder, essentially linked to the sort of expat community and the sort of ambassadors that tend to do these sort of 1 2 year circuits, they said then they'll take you seriously. It was absolutely crazy. It was almost 2 years to the day that we started to get the more sizable clients. So I don't know whether there's rhyme and reason in that and whether that is true, but it was certainly an experience that we had. Um, I think something that really stood out as a difference for us was a tribal element within Kenya and the culture. So in the UK, I guess you could liken that to a county issue, but actually, you would never really get a county not communicating with another county. But we did have undercurrents of that in the very first days until we started to sort of get our heads around what that meant, as particularly as sort of leading tribes that tend to be politically in power or tend to be strong business leaders. That was quite an interesting sort of Challenge, yes, but more of an experience, just understanding the dynamics around that. Um, I think related to the
Wow.
work, the difference was intellectual property. It is just not taken seriously. So you would see, I don't know, Virgin
Hmm.
Cafe or something with a copied logo type thing. And there's just like, that's just really cool and creative. It's
Wow.
like, no, it's actually plagiarism, but we'll go with it.
Yeah.
So you,
But technically it's okay in some way.
yeah,
So yeah.
like, okay.
Wow.
And also, I think for me, what really stood out was I can be quite sort of, I guess, in some respects, quite direct and just get on with business. The element of culture that I found really interesting in Kenya is they want to know about husband, dog, cat, family, and they want to do all that first. So you can't rush it. So, and that was really interesting because I was quite a close. Essentially,
Yeah.
at that time, I was fairly young, and I was also quite a closed book. So asking me what my family was
Mm.
doing, it was like, really, it's none of your business. Now, obviously, I've matured
Yeah.
a long time since that, but I do remember that whole sort of just really wanting to get to know who they were working with. And I understand from just people that I'm connected with, there's various countries in the Gulf that have that same sort of, they just want to get to know you as an individual and know that you understand their culture before the trade element actually takes place. So that was quite a sort of learning journey.
I
Yeah,
can
there's a
imagine.
lot when you suddenly go from,
Yeah.
because I didn't have any experience of Kenya beforehand. I kind of turned up there because my mom and dad have a charity. So my husband and I had essentially turned up, had a look at the work they were doing. We'd gone for a holiday. Um, and literally on the plane back over, we were at that point where we had an opportunity to do something different. My husband said, "Why don't we set the business up there?"
Mm.
I was like, "Done completely." So in 3 weeks, we literally packed up an entire house in the UK and arrived back in Kenya with 2 suitcases. That was it.
Wow.
So
God, that's a big decision to make over
three
the
weeks,
space of a
yeah.
plane flight. Yeah. What one flight and then 3 weeks. I'm assuming you were packing throughout the 3 weeks because that in itself can take quite a while. So,
Yeah, it was just
wow,
lots of little things
that's
that
a bit
happened
big
that just
move.
made the journey really easy. And then we just literally, as I say, turned up with 2 suitcases and 3 weeks later and
Light
set
packer,
the
I
business
like that.
up. And I think so that whole sort of getting to know the culture, whereas some people may employ somebody to support them in that, or they may go over for a holiday frequently to the area and just sort of like do all these recce trips. We didn't. We literally turned up saying, right, we're good to go. So yeah, it was an adventure. So there was a lot of, I think that first 18
Mm.
months, a lot of sort of getting to know what's actually going on out there and getting to know people and culture and how you work and how you don't work and what services are needed and how much of it is relevant from the UK to take across there.
That's brilliant. And I guess in a way as well, by chucking yourself into the deep end, it's just you kind of have no choice and you have to make it work, right? There's almost no turning back in a way. And you want to make sure that it's worthwhile, your journey out there. You've left everything back home and everything. So in a way, it's a huge risk to take and a huge kind of leap of faith there. But at the same time, it's kind of, the other side of the coin is that, well, now you kind of have no choice but to make it work. And so that could work in your favor, I suppose. What were you actually doing out there? So we actually never touched on that. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah,
Visagi
so
at the time,
Visage
right? That
was a
you were working
brand
with out
and semiotics agency. So we started very much around creating brand identity, marketing, looking at the entire communication strategy for businesses and how that aligned to their values. Um, More interestingly, or certainly the work that I found more interesting as we progressed over there, was the engagement with companies that had multicultural boards and communication and
there? Okay.
values reflected when you have got. So, one of our largest clients was one of the large flower farms over there, and it had South African, Kenyan, American, and British. And Dutch actually directors. So that
Wow.
melting pot of Dutch can be typically known for being quite abrasive and short and direct to the point. Then you've obviously got the Kenyan in there that is complete. They want to know your life story. So it's just how do you how do you move all of that together so that they're actually communicating effectively, and how was that whole sort of brand experience? So we looked at everything from when fair trade and Marx's came to do their audits. What was their experience of that sort of environment and that flower farm? So it was a really interesting work, and we worked across multiple sectors. But the flower industry was one of the ones that I enjoyed anyway. So
Yeah, you really wouldn't think of Nairobi for
it's
flowers, would
actually
you?
Naivasha. So
It's just me
yeah,
being naive, right? But
it's a
sorry,
place called Naivasha. It's about an hour and a half out of Nairobi, and
Natasha.
it literally is sort of the heaven of flower farms. So it's brilliant.
Wow, that's so cool. Kind of like the views you get with Amsterdam or sort of the Netherlands, rather. Is that the kind of
Yeah,
farms that
they're
you get
just
out there as well?
very, very large, large hectare space. Obviously, there's Lake Naivasha, so they've got a water source, but they just do so much
Mm,
as well for that wider community in the area. So the farm in particular that we worked a
of
lot
course.
with had schools, hospitals, education programs, wildlife
So
corridors,
cool. Wow.
all of those different things to really create a more sustainable ecosystem. And compared to where we are now as sort of with my current company as a B Corp, that was actually really powerful. And that was, I guess, those driving thoughts that sort of fed into the journey and where I am now, is just seeing all the different
Yeah.
engagement pieces that they did, and they did it from the heart rather than a to-do list, because they weren't going for B Corp or anything like that. It was something that they wanted to create, that community and culture that was safe and um, was able to support development and things like that.
Yeah, it's incredible how it's very much grassroots driven,
100%.
right? It's very much from the bottom up as well. It's the farm is everybody on the farm is from some locality nearby, and it's kind of serving the community there. And it's fascinating how that's the what B Corp and that sort of thing is trying to achieve is very much that. Except that's kind of how things organically would happen anyway if you have a local community doing business and things like that. But maybe there's challenges that we come across because of just we're such a global ecosystem now, and you have companies doing business all over the world in all different places. It doesn't matter, borders don't matter anymore. So perhaps that sense of belonging to a specific community and being, having grown up there and being from from that village or from that city or from that town, it just gives you ownership in a way, I suppose, over everything that you're doing then. So you deeply care about it, and you naturally are going to go and ensure that everything around you in that region is going to be healthy. Everyone's happy. You're going to help the community as much as possible. But perhaps part of the thing here is that there's a bit of a detachment when you're operating globally, and then you sort of establish, well, we have a farm in the Netherlands and we have a farm in Africa, but actually our headquarters is in
Mm,
in the US, and we've never been to either of those places, but we operate there. So maybe that bit of detachment, it's sort of that's where the support of something like B Corp and things like that can come in and kind of be like, okay, well, let's look at this from the ground up and actually kind of look at how it would work if you were to do things locally there and try and replicate the same thing, I suppose. Or maybe not all farms are that nice, and you were just an especially nice
they
group of
were
people.
they
It
were
could be
very,
that
very
way too.
nice, and did create a very um, growing environment and nurturing environment.
Mm,
And I felt that it reflected across all aspects, because they have thousands of work in terms of the workforce. Um, but it was how they were actually looking at the actual land as well. So, as I say, things like the wildlife corridors. So they were not building a farm, sticking it up there. This is priority. This is number one, and then you find that the native wildlife can't actually get to the watering hole that was originally there, and things like that. So they
mm,
had an element
wow.
that impacted on tourism. So they had a couple of hotels,
Sure.
fairly bespoke sort of hotels, but again, that participated in that sort of culture and environmental education way before, I guess, it was seen as being trendy, on point, whatever it may be. But it was just something, as you say, I think it comes from the heart, and I think it we. I'm trying to think sort of the similar environment. I think probably from what I've seen, and I don't really know depths of it. So if we get hunted down
Sure.
after this, I'm sorry. But things like where you see the
It's
sort of
okay.
coal
I'll
mining industry,
yeah.
where it was all around a certain
Right.
location, so that when that was removed, it impacted an entire culture. or a subculture within a local region over here,
Yeah.
or I kind of I can see a similarity that actually everybody in that environment, or my dad was actually involved in production of fabric labels in the mills and things in Yorkshire. So
Wow.
there was an element there where you had a
Wow.
specific road that was all around sort of manufacturing and label development and printing. And it was that, again, it was that sort
Mm.
of where you would know the families were located so close to where they were actually working and they're involved in manufacturing. So it created that culture. And I think that's probably the nearest that you can liken that experience to. But certainly in the UK, we obviously
Yeah.
don't have schools and hospitals and things coming out of individual organisations because of the wider infrastructure. But definitely you can see that sort of cultural similarity, the belief in the local business, which I think is something that
Yeah.
we've got to try and capture in
Powerful.
some way, even though we're global businesses. We've got to
Well, I
try and
mean,
find that
of course.
that DNA of the culture that we're working within that draws similar like-minded
Absolutely.
people to that organization, even though we might be geographically spread much wider afield now.
Yeah, it's really quite interesting. By the way, just before I forget, there's a really good Netflix series on this. I don't know if you've seen it
No, I don't think I have.
oh God, I'm gonna have to look it up. But it's a really good Netflix series on sort of like the old football association in the UK, how it's getting to be formed, and then it touches on how a lot of these. I think it's called the English Game
Okay.
on Netflix. Yeah, that's the one, the English Game, and it touches on how effectively modern football came to be. Like leagues started getting formed and things like that. But it touched a lot on the fact that they were all tied to a lot of the mills around those towns, and different clubs represented different groups of people and so on. And it's really quite interesting because like it was effectively taking a break from working at the mill, right? They would go and then play a bit of football together, and then there were leagues formed around that and so on. And I have to say, like, I never realized this was the case until I watched the series, which is kind of bad, I suppose, but at least better late than never. So now when you mention this around, the mills and the culture and so on, now I actually
Yeah.
know what you're talking about because I've luckily seen the series a few months ago. But yeah, it really is. It really is quite an interesting one in that we kind of we have sort of lost a bit of that kind of local
Mm.
community driven approach to doing business and fostering just kind of well-being as a whole society, because it's so easy to be in a big city and have millions of people around you and each person be working on a very small part in a much bigger thing. And in a way you may not have that as much, because also there's like huge infrastructure and everything's kind of catered for. So in a way, a lot of the responsibility for taking care of stuff is almost in some way taken away from the individual and done by the whole
Mm.
infrastructure. But when you're in those smaller communities and those smaller kind of towns or whatever, there's that very much sense of individual responsibility over what's going on around me and the land and everything and so on. And it's fascinating because I feel like in a way we're moving back toward that way of doing stuff, even though we still live in big cities and so on. But I feel like we're kind of moving back toward that way of operating, just naturally, because people are very much, not, you could say tribal, but community driven. Kind of just we have that kind of innate thing to want to be part of a community and part of a have a sense of belonging with everybody around us. Um, and it's tough to do that in a big
Yeah.
city. So you've got a lot of people kind of moving away to smaller towns and smaller cities, but at the same time, you've got things like Web3 now enabling a lot of communities to form online in different places, and you're now seeing it happen as well. Communities being formed around a lot of different areas, like you have like women in tech, and there's a really cool community around that, and you have another community that's very much around whatever. And I think businesses are in a way realizing the power of communities and the power of having that, um, whether it gives back directly to the land and to the country, or to earth as a whole in any way yet, maybe still work in progress, but we're sort of getting there with things. So anyway, we digress a little bit, but really interesting stuff. So you worked on that very early on, and I can see a bit of the elements of doing that very early on for you, and whether by luck or by design. I can kind of see that kind of stayed with you for quite a while then. And so different things you got involved with throughout your life. And then moving into what you're doing now, Healthy Nibbles, and, going into the B Corp side of things, I can kind of see maybe where the inspiration came from, I suppose. Would you say that it was there beforehand and just you kind of cultivated it in that early experience? Or would you say that you kind of realized that this is something you really want to do in other businesses just through that
I think
experience?
it's. I've never thought I would do a career swap in terms of, shall we say, branding to this type of organisation, but certainly those very early days of seeing that culture, the flower farm culture, but also in Nairobi, I was acutely aware of the juxtaposition between the extreme levels of poverty. I'm talking places like Kibera, so you're under $1 a day, the slums that are so vastly populated, sitting alongside some of the most affluent individuals in the country as well. And that to me was
Yeah.
a stark sort of realization that
Wow.
this is, I'm all for working your backside off, getting the rewards, but part of the success is also being able to nurture other people and bring other people along that journey. It's not about an isolated, where, hey, I've made my millions, whatever it may be, and I've got a big house and a yacht, and that's it. It's very much about taking that community and the people that you're in touch with on that journey. So I think those two key things really stood out for me when I was in Africa. It was a rather stark sort of, or shall we say, not stark. It was a very quick decision out of an event that took place that I ended up back in the UK, and then the sort of, shall we say, the layering. It was a bit like layering of a cake almost. It was kind of like, so we had that as a foundations, and then my dad got diagnosed with cancer, and it was a lifestyle related cancer.
Oh, God.
So then you
Sorry to
think,
hear.
ticking along in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, lifestyle related cancer, you look into that, you do all sorts of research, as anyone who's ever experienced anyone with cancer knows. Looking at that and you think, my goodness, so 60% of cancers are preventable if we just change diets and environment. So what on earth are we doing? We're literally consuming our way to essentially what could potentially be an early grave, but obviously that's not really a marketable campaign out there, is it? So
That wouldn't go down
that
too
doesn't
well.
work.
Yeah.
And then it was in the final days of his
Wow.
life, actually, where I was in a hospital. And so I was hungry. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning. There was nothing else to eat apart from the vending machine. Went to the vending machine, the usual
Oh God,
culprits. So
don't
you've got
start.
Coke, crisps, chocolate, all of that sort of stuff. Exactly. So
In a
you're in a
hospital
hospital
as well, which
setting.
is just so ironic.
And then there's a poster next to it saying diabetes and obesity kill, which was kind of made me, it did actually, the dark humor in it sort of did make me laugh at the time, probably with everything else that's going
Yeah.
on around me. And I thought, this is
Yeah, of
just
course.
ridiculous. We're in this place where you're trying to nurture health. And then I remember walking back through palliative care and seeing the nurses who, at the point my dad died, I think it was 2 other people died within a minute of him dying on the ward. So that's just probably, shall
Oh
we say,
God.
painting a picture
Wow.
of the stress that these nurses and professionals are under. And in their food sort of area where I think because we were on palliative care, you kind of get access to what they've got quite often. But it was chocolates. It was chocolates and
Sure.
toast because it was quick, simple things that
Wow.
they could eat in between all of these different things going on.
Carbs. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just thought, we're not really supporting our healthcare system if we're not providing decent food. They're being fueled on the chocolates, which are all the thank you gifts from all the sort of, should we say, the patient's relatives. And then you're also in a hospital, which, let's face it, nobody's really there by choice. You are either career professional under
Yes.
stress or you are there because there's something not right. That we just don't have an
Yeah.
environment that really supports health. So taking all of those, should we say, late into the night thought processes, then taking that experience into the work environment where you go into a business meeting or a networking meeting and you've got bacon rolls and croissants for breakfast, after work drinks, very much centered around alcohol and socializing, fueling coffee, the usual vending machines.
And very
Yeah,
sugary juices
we just
and yeah.
expect that high performance from our teams, but then we're not actually providing the resources for them to do that. And so that was the all of these
Wow.
different things going on. And then aside from that, so some of the work that my parents did in Kenya was around HIV patients. And neither of my parents are nutritionists, so there's
Mm,
no sort of medical background or anything. They found that by increasing access to eggs, spinach, kale, things like that, so increasing access to those healthy sort of whole foods, that the HIV medical bills ended up going down for the people that they were working with. There's no research, I'm not making any great big claims around this, but it
sure,
was
sure.
just something from
There seems to be a
yeah, a
correlation at least.
grassroots
Very interesting.
charity
Yeah.
that's not supported by large organizations. It's just something that was personal to them.
Sure.
And you see that and think, do you know what? Is there something in this sort of whole foods element? So that was a whole sort of, I would say that transitional time frame was probably about 5 or 6 years in total. But it was all of
Mm,
these different threads that kind of align to a change. And I had no idea what we were entering into when I said, let's set up a healthy vending company, or indeed where we are actually now as a
wow.
business. I had no idea what it was going to take us on the journey that it has done, but it's been a ride, definitely.
S- I was going to say, it seems like it's been a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, it's been very, very challenging in terms of, as I said, things like
Of course.
logistics and compliance and various different things. Obviously, setting up as
We'll,
sorry.
we'll get into that. We'll get
Uh,
into that.
but
Yeah.
yes, it has. The impact that we make is incredible. And sometimes it can
Mm,
be not a mega financial huge impact. It can be just seeing somebody not have a chemically laden energy drink to moving to a wholesome sort of more whole ingredients led drink of a similar energy type thing, but a natural base.
sure.
Sometimes
Sure.
it can just literally be those little changes. Sometimes it can be a letter that's or an
Yeah.
email through that says, since you guys have been in our business, I've managed to lose weight, or I've managed to improve my health, or I've managed to do, it's really supported me on my health journeys. So sometimes it's just those little moments that make it exciting. But yeah, it's been a journey.
So nice. Absolutely, I can imagine. And as with anything worthwhile, it's always going to be a journey, right? But it sounds to me like overall it's been quite the journey. It sounds like you've gone through a lot of ups and downs, and I can't even imagine how tough that was for you to go through that time. And I'm so glad to see that something extremely positive has come out of it. Like that must be something that I'm sure that whatever you believe in, but I'm sure if parents could look down now and see that you're doing this as and it all stemmed from that experience as well, then they'd be very proud. So it's incredible when you turn things around like that and kind of you almost let that fuel you in a way. But it also sounds to me like your parents were very inspiring people. With the charity stuff that they were doing, it sounds to me like they left quite an imprint on you, and that it's so lovely to see that in the world of business when you see people who just genuinely care, and it's coming from a good place. It's coming from the heart. Um, Challenges you touched on challenges, and I don't know where to start with challenges because it sounds like that there's a lot there that you must have gone through. With Healthy Nibbles, I read somewhere that you're serving something like a few 100 million consumers. Is that
244
right? That
million
you
through Transport for London. Yeah.
that's Gosh, that's incredible. Wow. It's how do you feel about that? Now that you can literally sit back and think, you've fed 244 million people healthy
Well,
things.
not fed. So just to
I
clarify,
suppose.
this is the footfall that we get past our
Okay.
machines. It's not not like individuals. Not
Okay,
yet.
got it.
We're
Got it.
working on
Got it.
that figure.
Okay, got it. Well, you never know. It could be, it
Yeah.
might be, yeah, it might be that much. But that's so you've come. Okay, interesting. So you've come across 244 million people. That is a huge number still, and that's a massive achievement in its own right. So how does it feel to get to a place where you can look back and think, wow, this has been really interesting. but at the same time, kind of stay with it and stay calm and think, okay, well, what's next, and what are we doing in the future? Like, how do you deal with that and almost not settle,
I
so to
think
speak, in a way?
I've probably got to flip that question, because one of the things that I'm not very good at is taking stock of what we've actually achieved. Um,
Okay,
yeah,
this is quite the opposite.
probably.
Okay, so it's a good thing that I'm telling you this then, because you
Exactly.
should take
No,
stock of
I
it. Okay.
think
Yeah.
I've had to, in terms of my personal journey, I've had to work on transitioning from perfectionism to excellence. And as a natural sort of, shall we say, drive
Nice.
within me, I am very high performance and high achievement. And that's been, gosh, that goes right back to schooling days. If I got under 95%, I'd be absolutely mortified. Yes,
Oh God.
yes. So
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
probably
Wow.
the opposite end of that. So as a
Yeah.
business, yeah,
Okay. So it's the
sorry.
wrong question to ask. It's the
Not
wrong
really,
question
because
to ask.
actually, I think everybody can have lessons from that. I think whether you run a company or whether you're just involved in an organization, taking stock of what you've actually achieved. I've always got a goal. I've got very
Mm,
high achieve or very high vision for the next sort of 5 to 7 years. All of that pretty strictly mapped out.
okay.
Obviously, not everything's going to go according to plan. Um, I think one thing that I have started doing in the last 18 months more diligently is using a specific journal, and the journal itself gets to the end of the week and says, what are the three big things that you've done really well on this week? What can you change, modify, and
Very
read,
good.
either do or drop? And I think that has been really helpful in just
Mm,
sort of getting me, even if it's only for 5, 10 minutes, getting me to focus on, do you know what, you have done something incredible this week, even when it feels like those weeks where, and
mm,
it's not just a week. The reality, and I'm hoping I'm not the
mm.
only one anyway, that you can sometimes have a dry period where you think, like,
You're
six
definitely
weeks,
not.
have I actually achieved anything in this last 6 weeks? Because you've been working on something different. And I think it gives you that opportunity to reflect back on those things, but also continue to make those sort of, like, should we say, 1% improvements on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so difficult in a startup environment to do the to feel the sense of achievement when you're working on such so many different things, and you're sort of making little improvements here, little improvements there, doing a little bit here, a little bit there. And I've been there. I've definitely been there, where you just feel like you're not really going anywhere, or you're not achieving much. But actually, if you look back, there's a lot of small little things that are building
Absolutely.
blocks that are going to be very important down the line, right? And you kind of it's hard to take stock of that, but it's important to do that as well. Um, so you moved from doing the farm stuff into doing a bunch of different things. And I promise we will come into Healthy Nibbles
Let's
and
go.
talk a lot about it in a minute. But I kind of want to continue on going on that journey, and it will inevitably all keep tying back to Healthy Nibbles, because it's everything you've done so far kind of ties back there. But I kind of wanted to sort of touch a little bit on sort of the regenerative business movement, because it looks really interesting and positive, and sort of some of the stuff that you're doing there, empowering businesses on their journey towards sustainability and regeneration, and kind of still keeping onto that thread of empowering business with sustainability and whatnot. Um, you see, you were doing this.
So that was more
When were
as
you
far as
working on this?
a
I'm just
sort
kind
of
of
a
looking.
membership. It's more like similar to B Corp. So it's
Okay,
not
got it.
specifically a role that I was involved in. It was more working with them as a sort of a founding member, shall we
Got it.
say. And it really does
Okay,
go,
brilliant,
I think
brilliant.
they all fall along that similar train of thought, that we cannot
Yeah.
continue depleting every resource that we have got available, whether it's human or whether it's the planet, anything. We can't continue depleting all of these resources, not giving back, and then I think they were a little bit before their time in terms of something I remember them saying, as
Mm,
far as um, planting trees for this sort of like carbon offset element, that actually it isn't really a sustainable model. The tree takes 20 years, 30 years to grow. In that time, you've used that resource in that individual moment in time. So it was all of that sort of the circular economy essentially that is coming out more so now in people's frameworks and in conversation. But I still think we've got an incredibly long way to go on that. We're still obviously the top percentage of businesses that make probably contribute the most damage are the ones that are not really doing a lot of the groundbreaking change. But then the small business community are ones that are really trying to be as agile and as responsive to these dilemmas as we can be. But that's not to say we should lose hope. I found a really amazing statistic that 99% of all business in the UK is SMEs. So we've still got some power to
Yeah,
punch
absolutely.
there in terms of how we can collectively change. So yeah, they were essentially, or are, should I say, on a similar journey to that sort of B Corp journey and all of those sort of regenerative circular
Yeah.
economy conversations.
Well, this is it, and you touched on a really important point there, and I know you're also an ambassador for multiple things and a member of multiple things, including B Corp. But you touched on a really important point there as well, that with the small businesses really can make a huge difference. And in a way, I guess I have to say this because the name of the podcast is quite literally all about profitable businesses that are for good. But more and more, it's just a mindset thing where the more the new businesses behave this way and try to create for good for profit things, then inevitably they're going to grow and become large organizations down the line. I mean, what is the lifetime of a business anyway? I mean, I can't remember the study that was done around this, but if you look at most businesses, I mean, no businesses really get past
Mm.
certain amount of decades, and very, very few make it that far. And so, obviously, there are some incredible examples that have made it for a very long time. But if you look at the really huge examples we have today, I mean, a lot of them were formed in the
Yeah.
recent sort of 20, 30 years, right? And like some of the biggest companies today. So the reality is that we're also doing this kind of for down the line. And the sooner and the faster that we move down this route, and encourage more investment to go into these types of businesses and encourage more support from the government for those types of businesses, then the quicker that we'll get there as well. And so hopefully in 10, 20 years time, the biggest companies in the world will all be
Mm.
very ethically driven. They'll be very much care about the environment in the world and so on. So yeah, so
No,
definitely not to lose
exactly.
hope. Absolutely. um, yeah. And you're in a startup world at the moment. Let's say, would you still call yourselves a startup, or would you brand yourself a little bit differently?
No, it feels like we're permanently on a startup journey. Well, we're
Okay.
2014 sort of registered. We started MVPs around end of 2015, so we're 8 years ish. I would say we
So,
definitely
okay.
haven't done, shall we say, what the traditional tech trajectory of 8 years in a tech company and you'd be almost ready for exit. We're definitely not on that trajectory, but we're just concluding our Series A round as
But
well.
it's
So I
also,
guess we're in moving from that startup to the scale up stage, for want of a better description.
yeah, absolutely. But this is what I want to kind of touch on to, is the fact that you're moving onto that now. But I also just wanted to touch on the fact that it's an extremely difficult industry to get into. And so like don't saying that, yeah, it's not a traditional startup journey, or whatever. Sure, it's not the traditional startup journey of usually they would exit in 8 years and whatnot. But honestly, the F&B industry is it's a tough one. From what I've heard from people around me as well, that I know who operate in that world, it can be quite a tough one to get into, to even
Mhm.
give approvals and so on. I think it's probably a little bit easier now than it used to be as well back in the day, but to get the approvals and get everything going through properly, and the testing and blah blah blah. So I can imagine that that's been a bit of a journey for you. Um, so yeah, but you're on your way
Yep,
to
just
Series A
concluding it.
now. You mentioned, right? So,
Thank
incredible
you.
stuff. Congratulations. That's amazing. Are you
Nope.
celebrating yet, or
Well,
not yet?
no,
Okay, all
you
right. We won't
celebrate
celebrate
when
just
the
yet.
funds
We'll
hit the
wait.
bank account.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Not,
that's
yeah,
the rule,
not
right?
and not putting any pressure on them. No, we're really pleased with who we've partnered with. It's multiple family
Amazing.
office, really share the values that we've got. Very much about collaboration and supporting that journey, and using their resources, connections,
Mm,
and yeah, and availability to actually help. that scale up process. So hopefully we're not just in a honeymoon phase, but I think I'm really excited to be working with them. So yeah, it's a new stage, and it brings about, as we say, with all of these sort of startup scale up journeys, entrepreneurial journeys, you move into those different phases. So we're going where we've done, I would say, over the last few years, those sort of getting into F&B, getting into food service, into vending. Probably on top of that, we've got additional challenges around what we're focusing on in terms of free from health and sustainability of products. So there's all of those. I think now we've got really, really strong foundations. It's like we've spent this time building strong foundations, ranging from sustainability to the actual infrastructure of the business. So now it's really sort of that high growth phase that we're moving into. So the next few years have got different challenges, but equally so, I think, from a personal perspective, different things that I'm going to be learning on that journey. Certainly, the aspirations are a much
Absolutely.
bigger team than what I've worked with in the past. So there's obviously growing that team, maintaining culture when you're going through that high growth element, but also both expanding our customer base beyond the UK into international territories, and the challenges that brings. How is that done? Do we do it franchise license? Do we actually go out there into different regions? Where do we start first? All of those different things. So a lot of exciting stuff ahead, which I'm actually really looking forward to.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine, and a lot more challenges that are very different to what you've dealt with.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, bigger teams and so on. Um, it is pretty good though that you've, in a way, yes, it may have taken quite a while to get to where you are now, but it is incredible because you built a lot of the infrastructure, as you were saying, like the base. And did you start off as a bit more of a service business, or have
So
you always been kind of
the very
productized
first
and
element of the business was health food in vending machines. That was the initial
okay?
product, and we never expected it to go beyond there. Now we're at three established revenue streams and an MVP on the way. So now moving into sort
Amazing,
of four revenue streams for the
amazing,
business soon.
brilliant. And to have done that before reaching Series A,
Hard
that's pretty
work.
incredible. So it was very much
A
bootstrapped,
little
a
bit
little
of
bit of
angel
investment at the
funding,
start.
but we found ourselves in a
Yeah.
very peculiar journey when we were looking for funding. And it really took the right mindset to
Mm,
understand the dynamics of the business, because we've got a we've got a tech focus in terms of the data that we track around consumption patterns, the healthiness of food, all of that side of it. But equally so, we've got a very, very heavy logistics and operational element. We need to refill vending machines. What happens if they break down? We distribute boxes. We have got a food service element. So you've got this really heavy logistics element, and asset
yeah,
heavy as
which
well,
is
with vending
very, yeah,
machines and hubs and
exactly.
things.
Yeah,
And VCs did not get it
yeah,
at all.
yeah.
So,
Wow, I'm,
you
I'm
know,
not I'm not surprised. Yeah.
finding the right investors on this journey, both the angels that we've got, but also the new incoming investor, has been really key, because actually the market size is absolutely phenomenal. The opportunities for the business are phenomenal.
Mm,
Very comparative to that sort of high growth tech space, but actually, when you've got such
yeah.
polarized viewpoints in certain funding communities, where they can't deal with the fact that you've got logistics and tech, or B2B and B2C, it becomes quite a challenge
Yeah.
despite the market size. So, yeah, I think some of it has been
Mm,
not necessarily a decision that we've wanted to take, it's been a decision we've had to take because we couldn't be categorized quite so simply as some other people that were also raising money.
got it. Got it. But that will have
100%.
built in a lot of
It
resilience.
probably.
And yeah, and you kept going
Yeah.
despite all those things, which is really really important. It is quite an asset heavy business if you're going down that route and owning the vending machines and owning a lot of that stuff and running the actual logistics and stuff. Um, I mean, ultimately, Amazon is a logistics
100%.
business, right? And it's extremely asset heavy one, and but hell, they have such a massive market share that
Yeah.
it's insane. And they weren't profitable for a very very long time because it is hard to build all these things out. But at the end of the day, it pays off, right? So I'm talking from a financial perspective. So like I'm thinking about it from like the investment point of view. Um, but that's quite interesting. And but when you mentioned they're actually working with family offices who are kind of like driven by the mission and everything, that sounded to me as I thought that that's by choice as well, because it's really important that you get investors on board who are not just going to give you a bunch of money, but actually help you and
Hmm.
open doorways and care about what you do and so on. Um, and some VCs offer that, but at the end of the day, it's probably a little bit easier to find that maybe in more angel-like or more grassroots-driven funds. So maybe as a bit of from your experience, maybe somebody else here listening is someone who's going through a similar journey route now of raising for the startup. um how would you go about navigating that and kind of finding the right people to invest into your business?
I personally believe it's like a marriage, 100%. I
Okay.
think you are going to work with these individuals for a long period of time. Or even if it's a short period of time, it may feel like a long period of time if they're the wrong people. I believe that finding those right individuals, I've got one in particular that comes to mind very frequently. I'm not going to embarrass him and mention his name, but he is one of our investors, and he's absolute star in terms of that pragmatic viewpoint when you're going, oh my goodness, what is going on? He is at the other end of the phone. And he's also
Mm,
very passionate about health, wellness, tech, well tech, all of that sort of stuff. So he's very passionate about the industry that we're actually in as well. What that enables is the ad hoc WhatsApp messages like, have you seen this article? Have you seen this round? Have you seen this acquisition? All of those sorts of things that are incredibly helpful on your journey. I've equally got some not so productive investors that have actually been a challenge to work with. And I can see the difference. If you put those two in balance together, you can see, do you know what? You really support and drive. And it's not a time commitment issue, because even the positive one, it's not like he's giving me a day a week or a day a month commitment or anything. It's just that open dialogue that's there. Whereas on the
mm,
negative experience, again, it's the lack of open dialogue and the tones and the different sort of communication ways of how can you support this company that you've actually invested in. Now, I appreciate every investor
yeah.
comes at this sort of investment journey, particularly on the angel stage. Every investor comes at it with a different approach. Some are just mitigating their risk. So it will be a set number of amount that goes across a multiple companies, and almost if it's part of a group and a syndicate or anything, they're not always bothered about the sector as long as somebody's validated the sort of message that has gone on. But what I've found is
Mm,
the value in the relationship of the strong ones is so significant that my recommendation to anyone I speak to now is, even though, and I'm going to contradict the entire thing that we had, where sometimes time was of the essence. We needed that fund now. We didn't need it in 12 months' time. So, all of those messages aside, in
yeah.
terms of plan your cash flow, know when you actually need stuff, I would say, first and foremost, if you can get funding from other ways, there's lots of new opportunities depending on the sectors that you're in to fund. But secondly, if you do want to go down that angel, really just getting to know them. Coffees, meals, find out what their portfolio companies think. Really, even the community that they sit in. And I am speaking from, as I say, the alluded to the one that we've actually got, but actually a really bad experience that we had last year with an investment deal. So I'm speaking from that experience of you know, you've got to speak to communities, speak to other startup scale ups that have been funded, and find out who would they raise the flag for, and who would they say, actually, you know, take a sidestep if you can. I think that is just so important, because I think you are on this
Mm,
journey together, and I think it's underestimated and not spoken about enough. Is this investment journey
yeah.
is a partnership, and you legally have to be responsible to sharing information with them, but you've got to know that you trust them and they've got your back as well on this journey. Not underestimating the fact that you're actually trying to give them a
Absolutely.
return as well. Obviously, you know, that is really, I take that
Of
really
course.
personally as well, probably too much so that I think, particularly in the tech world, there's an awful lot of let's go raise money and who cares about the investor, because you know that's what we do, we just raise and raise and raise. But actually,
Yeah.
I think something that connects back into the B Corp and the sustainability journey is we're raising money to give a return, and whether that's an individual return or whether that is a fund return, that's what you're ultimately doing. You're creating that continuous
So
cycle of return, because ultimately then that's investing in the next generation of entrepreneurs that are coming on in front of you, because you're giving that investor more money back essentially. So I see it as quite a sort of circular relationship as well.
that's a really nice way to think about it. That it's a circular thing, and you know, if you find a good investor, and obviously, not to say that if you find a bad investor, screw them over. No,
No,
by
no,
no
not
means do
that.
that. But if you find an investor, yeah, right, exactly. But if you find a good investor, then absolutely. And when investors give you money, you want to give them the returns back, because then they can go
Yep.
and fund other businesses. That's also a really nice way to think about it. Because I think some people might think about it from the point of view that, you know, well, I'm just, obviously they are making money and you are helping them make money, but they're also helping you make a lot of money and build your vision with your startup. But by actually helping them in that way, they can go and invest in more things like you. So that's a really interesting one. I've actually seen a couple of attempts as well, sort of in the startup world, of trying to tackle that. Who is the good investor? Who's not a so good investor? What's been your experience with that VC or that angel and so on? And there's a few cool attempts, including sort of an anonymous group of founders that kind of, you know, talk about things openly and whatnot. And it's really nice. It's really
I
really
was
nice to kind of
introduced to that a little bit too
be
late,
able to come
as
across this
in
sort of thing.
somebody shared it with me last week
Where are
indeed.
you? Oh gosh,
um,
yeah.
I'm like,
Only last
have
week.
you
Oh
seen this
wow.
group?
Okay.
And this is like,
Yeah.
you can share experiences anonymously. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
It's so
It,
awesome.
and
Yeah. It's
actually, I
so
think
awesome.
it's so powerful to use these connections, because of the good and bad experiences that you go through. Because they can actually,
Yeah.
when the pressure is on, the last thing you need is an irritant of an
That's the
investor
thing.
coming and saying,
Yeah.
well, did you do that wrong? Why did you do that wrong? We would never have done that wrong. And it's like, okay, you know, you're not in
Yeah.
this experience, you're not living it. Either give me the advice, because I'm absolutely open to it, or don't. But there's no point in coming in and just criticizing now. You know, I could have done with your help a year ago.
Absolutely. But equally so on the other end of that scale, because I have had that experience too, is where there's a lack of involvement, like too it complete, like, you know, it's complete lack of involvement, too much of a lack of involvement, or you know, it's like it's incredible. Yes, thanks that you trust me so much, and I love it. But you know, I also want your input and advice and network and connections and everything. That's also very
Yeah, I've
important,
got a
right?
few that
So
I
I
don't.
kind of see that, like,
I was
you
just
can
going to
have,
say I've got a
sorry,
couple in there from a syndicate that they get the monthly updates, but there's no it's
and that's
not a
about it.
two-way relationship. It's a
Yeah,
one-way relationship, 100%. And I
yeah,
think maybe you've got to, especially if you're there's an element of, do you complain about that? But actually, with the amount of crowdfunding and things like that, you don't engage with all of those either. That, you know, it's just slightly
no,
different.
no, no,
And I
of
think
course,
what I've identified in our group is people that are passionate about the industry, are passionate about, could be female founders, it could be scale up growth, it could be whatever. You know, they've got some form of emotional connection to the vision that we've got. We've got people that we don't really engage with. We've got people that'll sort of
yeah.
touch base every year, and then we've got only a very small minority, but will find anything to complain about in any update, even if you'd grown by 400%. If you'd done that, you've probably done it too quick or something. I don't know. That, you know, they would find an issue. But I think
Okay.
what
Interesting.
that has done is my first, I would say, again, I didn't need to, because it was service industries before, I didn't need to raise. This is something that I've needed to do with this business. Um, it's a lesson. You learn, right, I can spot this, I can spot that. I know that if I exit this and go on to do something in the health and wellness space, I will absolutely go back to our investor that's in health and wellness and say, will you join me on this journey? Um, so I think there's lessons to be learned in everything that you go through, and I think, I'm
Mm.
always of that sort of mindset that you can either learn from it or you can complain about it. But if you complain, it's only going to bring your
Mm.
environment down around you, as opposed to actually saying, do you know what, I learned from this. I know now I can identify X, Y, and Z. I can make those changes in future decision making.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It sounds also to me like there is an element of you don't necessarily need everybody to be involved as an investor, but at least find one or two investors who are really key and they're going to help almost provide that not maybe a coaching role or maybe a mentor role or maybe just an open doors for you role, but really think about what are the areas that you also need support in that sense, and try to identify a few investors who are kind of who can provide that and help you with that, as well as the others, because there are some people who just kind of think, oh, that's a good idea, I like it, I also think it's going to be it will make me rich one day, or I think it's a great idea and I just want to support the business, but
Mm.
I have too many things on my plate, I don't want to be involved. You do get that too, and sure, that's okay. um, but if everybody's like that, that can be a problem. And then but I can also see your point is that if everybody
That's
wants to get
also a
involved,
problem,
that's
yeah, because
also
you don't
that's
want too
also a
many.
problem, because that's also
But
yeah,
interestingly,
precisely. So it's
you
almost
just
that.
said about mentoring and coaching.
Mm,
That was, shall we say, our star star investor. That was something that he actually connected me to when
okay.
I was going through a particularly challenging moment. Was
We're gonna get people asking who that person is now. By the way,
that
you keep mentioning that. So,
I'm not
yeah, go
sharing him.
ahead.
No, I do actually connect him with other stuff in the market just in case. But
Yeah.
no, he's phenomenal. But he spotted, obviously, from that external perspective moment when I was in a sort of bit of a angsty time, and connected me to
Mm,
a coach who I worked with over a series of sessions. And I never forget one thing that, and I've taken it with me through since she said it. But she said, never forget whose business this is. And I was having a particular issue with a certain group of the investors or section. And she said, don't forget whose business this is. And there is
mm,
that element. I know there is shareholder value that you must deliver on, but I also believe that too often, as founders, you've got everything coming at you from lots of different sides. And some weeks get overbearing, some weeks are challenging. And actually, remember what you've created. It goes back to that whole thing that I said at the beginning as far as the journaling. Remember what you've created, and remember that it is your business and it is your baby, and you have the deciding factor usually. To actually navigate which direction you're going to take the business in. And it is an awful, you don't have to do everything that every investor says. Otherwise, you will be pulled from pillar to post.
mm,
Something that I can actually sort of relate that to in our experience, very early days when we launched the boxes, the original concept behind the boxes was if an item potentially didn't suit the vending machine, it would be really well suited to a box. And there was another channel that we could actually use. And I had
mm.
a couple of investors who said, you are absolutely bonkers. You need to stay on course. Don't get distracted. Don't do this. Don't do that. Um, when COVID came, that's essentially the cash generator behind the business that kept us afloat for the 18 months, because the minute the lockdown occurred, every single element of revenue just disappeared overnight from the hubs,
Plummeted.
because
Yeah.
there was nobody going into businesses, there was
Wow.
nobody traveling. So the boxes provided, actually, we grew by about 30 or 40% during that COVID year, I think, at least. Might have even been more. And that was just literally because we had that product already in place and it had been utilized by brands for
Incredible.
probably about 3 years prior to COVID had taken place, but it was an established product
Wow.
and was able to be adapted very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes I wouldn't have foreseen, I'm not some fortune teller foreseeing COVID, but go with your
Nobody would
gut,
have
because
foreseen that.
you've got to remember that on this journey, because you'll get a lot of viewpoints from so many people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good point. It's remembering that whose business it is, but also kind of as another way to say that is that at the end of the day, the investors invested in you, so that because they trust you and they believe in
Hmm.
you and your decision making abilities and so on. So at the end, so even if investors are kind of being a little bit annoying in that sense, you can always turn around and say, well, look, you invested
Yeah.
in me, right? Because you trust my decision making abilities. Well, then trust me to do what I think is best, and don't worry about it. Like the rest will fall into place. So in a way, it's also to remember that it is very much. You're right. It is very much the founder's role to also understand which advice to take on board and when and so on. Tough thing to do though
Oh,
when you're in the
completely.
trenches, right?
There's days where you just think,
Yeah.
what am I doing? There's days where I've literally been at home feeling so demoralized because either investors or other people have, weighed in heavy on,
Mm.
what are we doing? Even as a B Corp, if you make a wrong decision, it's like, well, that wasn't very good for B Corp. It's like, yeah, but we're all on a journey where, some things are going to work, some things are not going to work. And
Yeah.
yeah, you've
And that's
got to
okay.
be to get yourself comfortable with that, because not every single thing is going to work on the entrepreneurial journey. You're going to absolutely floor it on some stuff, but some stuff's going to take off and you're going to shine, and you'll be ahead of the market trends, and
Absolutely.
you'll just look like you've got this, superpower or something. But it might just be down to,
Yeah.
yeah, just a little bit of luck in there as well. So,
There's definitely a sprinkle of luck in there. I'm a firm believer in now in that there is a sprinkle. I think there are things that can
100%.
increase your luck. Let's put it that way. But there is also an element of luck there, timing and whatnot. Um, it's interesting when you see some huge companies sometimes doing things really badly
Mm.
because they're trying to move really quickly and to do things, and they're big companies. And a lot of people forget that like in a way, if things aren't breaking, and there's that cliche thing, of course, where if things aren't breaking, then you're not moving fast enough in a way. And I do think there's an element of truth to that, is that you kind of want to be moving a bit faster than what you can handle in a way, and obviously that means you're going to
Yeah,
be making mistakes, and that's okay, right?
absolutely.
um, just learn from them and so on. So what would you say, I mean, that's obviously on the investor side of things.
Mm.
Going back a little bit, previous experiences, and I'm asking this question because I I can see the difference in how I've developed as a person in different areas of business as I've done more and more of whatever stuff in the startup world and so on. And I can see, and I look back at how I used to be, for example, as a team leader at one point in my life, or as whatever at one point in my life, and cringe because of just how bad I was at doing some things. And I'm still learning tons, obviously, on a daily basis, and I'm sure everybody is still learning tons on a daily basis, whatever they're doing. But I'm interested to know, kind of, for you going through those journeys, what are sort of like, maybe if you're happy to share, obviously, because this could be quite a personal thing, but what are kind of like two or three things or two or three areas that you just used to do really badly and you've kind of learned to just do better over time, and you've learned that you had to improve those as a
I
leader or
think there's
founder
two
of a business?
immediate that spring to mind.
That's
One
that's a
that's a
good
work in
sign.
progress
Okay.
still. So I mentioned it briefly before, but the perfectionism to excellence. Um, I'd grown
Yep.
up, in some ways influenced by this perfectionism. Like, you didn't take rest. I mean, I cannot remember my family ever having a nap in their entire life at all, ever. Um,
Wow.
I got sympathy from my grandmother when I nearly died of a stomach bug, but I don't remember the sympathy being sort of like, oh, poor little thing. There was no mollycoddling of children. It was actually, I think, in
Oh.
that weird, generational thing, without giving my age away too much, but it was like, children are seen and not heard. Do as you're told. These are the boundaries.
Yeah.
That
Toughen
was
up. You'll be
like it.
fine.
We,
Yeah.
that certainly. there was an influence there, shall we say, of a perception of excellence. Like, yeah. So I had an
Sure.
innate drive anyway as a child. I mean, I was a competitive equestrian. Everything that I did, I would do to the max. And
Wow. That's so cool. Do
no,
you
not
still
since the
do a
business.
bit
The
of
business
horse
has
riding at the moment?
taken over. Well, not for a while
Uh-huh.
actually, but it's just, I think, so there was all of that sort of, you must, I would never be, for instance, when I was competing, second and third place was a failure in my mind at the time. And
Gosh,
that,
wow. Okay.
yeah, so that followed me
I'm
through.
getting the
So
picture.
I've had to change a lot over time to accommodate excellence. Like, you've done your best, you've given it your all, you've done absolutely the best that you can do in that situation, and you've done it as well as that you can possibly do. I'm not a fan of the whole sort of, if it's nearly there, get it out as a product or as a situation. But at the same time, I think if you've done, say for instance, we are launching an MVP. If we know that we've set stage one and we've done that to the best of our ability, and there's a learning from that, and then stage two. So I think that that has been a journey, because I would certainly, within the perfectionism, I would put that onto everybody around me as well. So I would expect everybody else to be
Sure.
100% perfect. And if you're not that type of person, for instance, my husband, who I've been
Mm,
with
that
for
can be
since I
tough.
was 17, is not that type of person. So
Oh,
very, very
wow.
different. And I'm like, why are you
Wow.
not driven by this? What is wrong with you?
But how have you sorry but how have you, since you were 17, how have you dealt with that? That you must have had so many fights around that. Not to imagine, not to get too personal,
Yeah,
but
we've
like,
worked together 20 years.
wow. But you somehow, I guess that was a good learning ground for you, right? So if you could do that with your husband from when you were 17, then you would definitely be able to do that with your
Yeah,
team
so
later on in life. So
that was a huge
you could think
journey.
that was a good learning ground.
So
Yeah,
yeah, perfection to excellence.
yeah, of course.
More along the lines of well-being and looking after yourself. I that has taken.
Uh-huh.
Sorry,
Okay. Well, I guess that kind of ties
it
in a
does
way,
actually.
right?
Yeah.
I guess that kind of ties in
So
in a
I
way, right?
remember with
Yeah.
the
Okay.
agency in Kenya, literally, it was a joke to my team, but actually, it's not a proud moment at all. I fell asleep, stood up, because I'd worked something in the region. I think I was
Oh my
clocking about
God.
60 hours straight through or something. So
Wow.
neither did I
I
until it
didn't know that was
happened.
possible. But hey, there you go.
And my brother was there and
Yeah.
my husband was there, and
Wow.
they actually, it was a bit of a joke that she will literally carry on working until she falls asleep, stood up. Um, that was a massive, well, to be
Okay.
fair, that single experience wasn't
Mm,
so much of a wake up call as it probably should have been. Um, I do find
sure.
myself, even now, if I get a project or if there is something going, I will cut out everything. So even to the point, the place could be burning down around me and I'm focused on what I'm doing. So I think that for me is an ongoing journey of learning to understand the fact, and I am getting better. I spot the cues around when I'm getting really, really stressed. There's certain physical cues that I will get that I just think, right, I need to go for a walk or I need to go get some rest and sleep properly. I've invested in things like Aura Ring to track sleeping so that you can
Okay.
start to see those patterns. And that's been
Okay.
incredibly helpful and supportive. But I think those are sort of,
Yeah.
yeah, those are probably the two key ones. And that,
The two areas. With the health one, that's yeah. I kind of want to dive a bit deeper into that one because that's a really easy one to let
yeah,
go of when you're in such a busy environment. I yeah, I mean, I remember personally, and I've definitely seen so many people around me have done the same thing, where at some point you just sacrifice sleep and sacrifice eating well because they're the easiest thing to let
yeah,
go of is sacrifice sleep and eating well. And even social life and social life is a huge part of well-being that a lot of people also don't really pay enough attention to, in my opinion. But like if for me, I remember at one point I think I wasn't sleeping well. I was working practically all day and I didn't have a social life. I would eat whatever was there because I just had to. Basically, I looked at food not as food, but just as
mhm,
purely fuel to keep me going. So I'd eat whatever was there that would keep me going. I don't really care, it's fine. And it does. And yes, you feel like you get it's a weird thing because I'm kind of still I'm still to some extent battling with it a little bit because I definitely get more tasks
Mhm.
done if I work longer. Okay. Yes, I'm going to be less efficient at getting those things done the later I go in the day because I'm more sleepy and more tired and probably need to have a little bit of rest. But I'm still going to get some things done. So, yes, something might take me, 30 minutes in the morning and it will take me 2 hours in the evening or an hour and a half in the evening. But I'm still at least kind of getting it done. And then there's the weird thing next to that, which I'm sure you might relate to, um, where if you've been sleeping really well, so I now I'm trying very very
Mhm.
hard to get at least 7 8 hours a night. I'm trying very very hard to do that, like 6 to 8 hours at the very least. Um, so well, six at the very least, yeah.
It's getting
And
worse.
it's going back. Okay, 5.5 now. I'm joking. Then yeah, he's just gonna keep going back and back. No, I'm trying my best to get 6 hours. But there's this thing I'm battling with where if I get a really good night's sleep, I feel fresh. I feel amazing. I can tell that I feel better. I'm emotionally in a better place. I'm better to have more able to have better conversations with people. I can think more creatively and so on. But there is also the other side where if I'm lacking a little bit of a sleep, and please nobody take this as advice, but when I'm lacking sleep, if I sleep say 4 hours or something like that, I'm a little bit cranky, which gives me a little bit more sense of urgency. So I almost feel
The
like it
catalyst.
kind of like gives me a bit more of a okay, I'm a
Yeah.
bit more cranky. Yeah, I have a little bit less time for the subtle beauties of day to day life, and so I'm just gonna just be more direct and just get more things done and just kind of focus and do that way. And then I find that after 2 or 3 days of not sleeping very
Mm.
well, it just becomes the norm. And so my mind just kind of like, okay, this is now just the norm of doing things. And I almost forget that at one point I felt really refreshed by sleeping so much. And then it's easy to kind of like stay in that mode for a while. But I start noticing that, stress increases and so on. And so I don't really have. Sleep is really important. I've read why we sleep, and I've done looked at sort of a few of those things, and now understand why it's important. And I try my best to sleep well, but I also just sometimes go into those phases of saying, okay, screw it. For the next 2 weeks, there's a lot going on. I'm just going to sacrifice sleep, and I'm just going to get a lot more done, and have that slightly increased
So
sense of
I
urgency. Have you had similar
constantly, and
battle
it's
here with
ongoing.
this, or is it just me? Or
I think
right?
I
Okay.
added to the dynamic. We had a child, so she's 15. So you have a different dynamic in there as far
Oh
as
wow. Can't even imagine what that would be like
no,
with
it's a
with
bit.
that on
It's
top of
fun.
everything. Wow. Yeah.
Like, did you
Yeah, I can
pick her up,
imagine. I
or
can
am
imagine.
I picking
At,
her
at, le-
up,
at
or
least
what is she
15 now,
doing?
though.
Where is she?
Yeah, what's actually happening? Where?
No,
Oh God, you
yeah,
forgot her at the school.
better
Oh
check
no.
in.
Okay.
No, she's absolutely brilliant, and she's sort of got her own path and very much used to parents doing this journey. But I
That's so
think
cool.
you're right. There is an element of, and this is, I think it's important to talk about it because it is, should we say, the holy grail of 8 hours a day is glorified a little bit too. Well, it's not. It is very essential, but sometimes if you are running a business, don't underestimate the hard work that goes into it. It takes a lot of energy, and
Yes,
there's
exactly.
I would argue, I'm totally against this whole, you can work 4 hours a day, you can do a 4 day week, even though we're very much in that well-being space, and that is part of our narrative and it's part of our conversations, and we have to be a flexible employer as well. And we also engaging a lot of our clients, we're engaging in good nutrition, but then we're having those conversations around sleep and stress and movement and all of those things that sort of form into that whole sort of healthy existence. But you, as a founder, taking it purely from a founder's perspective, if you are trying to create something impactful, I would argue that the vast majority of people have not done it on a 4 hour day or a 4 day week at all. I'd be
Absolutely.
very surprised if there's not something in the background. They've either created something very similar that they can carbon copy, or they're just not being honest. And there's a few out there on certainly on LinkedIn, that I've seen that are actually saying it as it is, that this is what I gave up. You do give up stuff. I know Elon Musk is not an example to go by, but has famously said you've
Yeah,
got
yeah, of
three
course.
choices in terms of where you put your priority. So, like you said about socializing, diet and health, fitness, sleep, the business, all of those things, family even needs put in there. That you can actually only choose three of them at any one time in your life. So I think there is an element that creating a business is hard graft, and it should be. It's a journey that's worth doing, but it's only worth doing if you actually love that journey and love that exhilaration element. And you've got to be able to
Yes.
manage stress. You've got to be able to manage demands. Um, I think you've got to know the journey that you're in. You've got to know what stage you're at. And it is a constant balancing. I mean, I know that, for instance, we're going into post investment where we're looking at building the team quite a lot. That means I have worked out that I had about literally 2 months of solid interview time. And that's if all I did for 8 hours a day was interview, ultimately with the number of roles. But how
Oh
do you
my
spread
God.
that? How do you
Wow.
ease the burden? How do you do different things? But that's not including any of my day job either. So
Yeah.
it's, that you're going to go through periods of time, and what we've done to caveat that is when the investment comes in, we're going to take a week off, and then we're going to go into it a bit fresher, and then in summer we're
Mm.
going to take another holiday. Now, putting that in perspective, we've not taken a holiday since 2017. So it does sounds rather glamorous,
Oh
like
God.
I've got two
Wow.
holidays in 3 months, but actually we've got years of backlog to go. So I think
Yeah, yeah, of course.
knowing what you are going through in the stage of the business, and that can ebb and flow, but don't expect to come into a scale up journey
Yeah.
or a business journey and think that you're going to do it lightly, because you're not. But I think at the same time, you don't want to end up killing yourself in that process. So it is such a fine
Absolutely.
line that you've just got to tread almost daily. And
Yeah.
sometimes you might have to do it daily. Sometimes you might have to do it by the hour. How do I feel? Whereas other times you know that, right, I've got a period of time
Mm.
that I know that I'm going to be doing 12, 15-hour days, but I know that in doing that, this is the goal and the output and the final thing that you're going to have created or achieved. And it's not really, I'm just thinking back to my very first sort of training, professional training sort of degree was linked to event management. That is very, very similarly.
That is a
Yeah, you've got all this time
nightmare of a
where
world.
you
That's,
you sign out of
yeah.
the 48-hour directive. You do not, you're not even going to get
Yeah.
employed if you want to stay within that set time frame. You put all
Hmm.
these hours in,
Hmm.
and then this great, beautiful, fantastic event happens, and then you crash after it. So there are certain roles that, for you to be excellent and to be brilliant in that role, you're just going to have to put the hours in. You've just got to balance it in a weird
Yeah.
way, and you'll find it right for your
Yeah.
individual.
It's yeah, and it's very true. And like, I've met investment bankers who, they know that, okay, for the next 10 years of my life, I
I
have
don't have a
no
life.
life except work, because they're working to get to a certain point, right? And they know that, okay, once I'm there, then I'm going to be able to do X, Y, Z, which is, I mean, it's a personal choice at the end of the day, and on what they do with it. I have thoughts, by the way, too, on the whole 4-hour, 4-day work week, and so on. And we can go into this if you want, but I'm not sure how much it will resonate with a lot of people. My personal thoughts on this, but um, I'll be totally honest. I worry a little bit sometimes about this movement to make it the standard, the national standard to have a 4-day work week. And my concern is around, it's a tough one. It's a complicated thing to go into, but just very briefly, to stay to stay relevant on the global stage, it's
Mm.
I think it's going to be a struggle to do that with a 4-day work week. And this is just, it's not a popular opinion, but it is the reality. And but then there's the question of, okay, well, how much does it matter to be relevant on the global stage and so on?
Yeah,
But that's a
exactly.
whole other conversation in its own right. So we're not going to go there. But yeah, but I think it's interesting. There is something to be said as well with um, for calming down a little bit on the hyper growth mentality. There is something to be said for that too. So I do get that argument too very much, in that, like, perhaps it is a good thing that we hyper grow as a civilization, and then we just kind of like, okay, let's chill out on the growth a little bit, and continue to grow, but we don't have to, like, be going in an exponential way all the time, kind of thing. So there is something to be said there too. um but yeah, but it's an interesting one. I think my main thing around that though is that, like, it is a personal decision. It's a personal choice if people want to do this or not. And if you want to be a founder of a startup, I would, unless you're just extremely good at what you do, then sure. But for the most part, most founders I've met in my life have been
I
very
think,
hardworking
yeah,
people. That's been definitely one common denominator between all of them, is
absolutely. I
they're
would
very, very
totally agree.
hardworking.
And we,
So
as a business, we're flexible for our team. So if somebody only wants to work 4 days, that's great. But you
exactly.
take, you take the salary that's appropriated. So, and we've
Mm,
not had any
yeah,
pushback on that. So if somebody's
of
wanted to,
course.
if we've advertised a role, it's a 5 day week, they only want to do 4, they've taken that salary drop to accommodate for the 4, which I think is
Which is fair
fair. And
enough. Yeah.
I'm we're totally open to that sort of molding around the availability of the best talent for the business and the best team. And we have got the most amazing team at the moment. It's just phenomenal. Um,
That's
but I
incredible.
think, as you say, a national directive that is the norm. It really isn't for a sustainable business. Um, and it's also,
Yeah,
I think we need to
exactly.
take the pressure and lift the lid on even the home working side that's got into the norm. It doesn't work for a logistics company. It doesn't matter how much direct, chat out there is. We cannot turn our business into a home working. Ultimately, who's going to pack boxes? Who's going to fill? Who's going to
Mm,
service? And our clients are
yeah.
not doing the homework, and they're bringing people back because they're finding a loss of community.
Well, but that's exactly what I was going to say next as well. Is that with the whole homeworking thing,
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who just don't want to work from home. They just don't. They prefer to meet people and intermingle and
Mm.
keep a separation between home and work life, and choose. I want to work 2 days from home this week. I don't want to work from home at all next week. I want to work 3 days from home next week, or whatever. At least have the flexibility, but also a lot of them actually just, I mean, I speak for myself as well.
Yeah.
I personally prefer to be in the office most days in the week, just because it's nicer and I can go back home and then take my clothes off and wear my
Yeah.
pajamas
Exactly.
and feel at home, right? And eat warm food and go to bed and feel like I'm resting and I'm looking after myself. For me, that's also like a psychological thing where if I'm working right next to the place where I sleep,
I think there
that's,
is that.
I like to keep that bit of
Yeah,
degree of
I think
separation
that's a
between the two if
huge
I
part
can.
of it, and I
So
think it's not um, without. So should we say it's not worthy of sort of that disconnect around the rise of mental health and this sort of having people holed up at home, even though we do arguably, I work from home um, on an ad hoc, and yeah, I absolutely love the fact that
mhm.
I just get some silence and I can just sort of go into my zone and all of that sort of stuff. Um, but I do think there's so much community, and I had one of my she's no longer with us, but it was an ex-employee, and she was with us at the start of COVID. And one of the things that she said, which I thought was quite interesting, because she'd been with us a while, but then when we suddenly introduced Teams or Slack or whatever, just that whole thing of needing to reach out needed to be more of a moment than it necessarily was if you were just grabbing a coffee at work. And it suddenly became more of a situation that you were having to create and navigate, and needed to have something substantial to say rather than just actually a
Absolutely.
passing comment. But I think if anything, and we can take anything good out of these changes that have come on, is that sort of employer flexibility, so that we're open to the demands. It might be
Yeah, of course.
somebody has got a relative with cancer and needs to go check in on them, or does have an older parent that they're looking after, and a couple of days a week they're doing care sharing and things, or adopting a child, or whatever it may be. But there needs to be that sort of flexible approach to what works really well for you.
Yeah.
um and for employers to
Absolutely.
kind of create that, but also not to lose fact that businesses exist to sell, to have money, so that they can pay salaries. And if we get this sort of perpetual um, environment that is underperforming and all about, shall we say, the fluffy stuff and just being, let's have a nice, everybody's happy, blah blah blah, then you actually
Yeah.
potentially, if that goes on too long, could lose profitability, and then therefore you lose jobs, and there's a negative effect to it. So I think it just needs a really balanced approach and a really sort of grown up approach, rather than a sort of carbon cutout approach for every single organization. Because I do know businesses with tremendous culture that are doing really, really well, that are purely online based and
Yeah.
working from home and remote and have that whole setup, and that works for them. But equally so, um, not to chastise and beat up the companies that are physical in their actual practical
Exactly.
day to day
Exactly.
roles. So
Yeah.
yeah, lots to talk about there. Could do another one on this.
No, absolutely. We could literally do a whole other one on just on the subject. It's so true. No, but I think you nailed it on the head there. It's just not having that carbon cut approach and try and copy paste it everywhere else. It's just not going to work like that. Because it's, yeah, different
Yeah,
organizations require different things
absolutely.
and different stages as well of the business. So you could definitely argue that it's easier to be in one room if it's two or three co-founders starting out. I've from my experience, maybe it's my style of working as well. Give me a whiteboard and a room and a couple of people,
Yeah,
and so many magical ideas will come out of that discussion, right?
yeah, that's definitely what we're
Struggle to
focusing
do
on at
that
the
online.
moment with the high growth
Very
element.
this
We have somebody new joining the team next
Yeah.
week, and whereas the person's
Mhm.
not based where the office is, they're making that, and this was as much, it was a
Mm.
collaborative conversation around that, but it was very much being present in the office because we're going through that high growth stage. So you don't want to turn up to the office 2 weeks later and realize that there's another 15 people that have joined and you actually don't know who anybody is and you've not created any dynamics.
Yeah,
um,
that's a
and
very
I
important
really
point.
think as
Yeah, yeah.
well, for the B Corp and the impact element of the business, the sustainability and the purpose, that sometimes is because it's not average and every single business is trying to go on that journey. I think it actually does need that sort of joint connection, that collaboration. So you're constantly thinking about, again, like I've said before, with the sort of whole let's buy trees and we've offset our carbon, that's, we very quickly realize that's not the route to a safe environment going
Yeah,
forward.
yeah, yeah,
So I think
absolutely.
just getting everybody together so that you can constantly think and brainstorm ideas from, for us, from the person packing a box to who's on reception to who's leading marketing, sales, operations. Everybody will have a different, unique emotional and intellectual perspective to bring to that table. But if they never actually get together around a table, then it doesn't actually happen. Because they might think I've got a great idea, but actually,
Yeah,
who do I
that's
who do
exactly
I
it.
send that to? Who do I broach that with? It might just be a stupid idea. I don't want to mention it. Whereas
Yeah,
in a room, they will.
yeah, and that's exactly it. And in a room,
Yeah.
it's easier to build on top of other ideas, and it's, yeah, I don't know what it is, but it's very difficult to replicate that online. I don't know why, and I really want to see
Mm.
an efforts to try and replicate that online in some way to enable companies to work better remotely. Because like I give you an example. So our CTO, he's based abroad. He's been abroad for the whole time, and he was
Oh
actually in
God.
Ukraine during everything that was going on, and gosh,
Yeah.
there was so much resilience. Just from everyone from the region. Generally, we have people from the region generally who kind of are working with us, and despite everything that was going on, they were just so resilient, which is incredible. And he's kind of moved around and whatnot, and still operating everything online, and we managed to kind of get these things done. But it's very much a case of, okay, we need to get the laptop and the camera in front of the whiteboard and still kind of brainstorm together and so on. But it is a lot easier when you're in person. So one of the ways, for example, that we've tried to replicate this whole environment of being able to kind of just share openly, and if you have an idea, just bring it up, is to have these drop-in sessions where we just kind of co-work online together on a drop-in session. So, it'll be going on for like 4 hours, and then whoever can drop in just drops in, and kind of everyone just works at the same time. So it's nothing crazy, just Google Meet. And then in that case, sometimes someone will just quickly unmute and be like, oh, guys, what about this, blah, blah, blah. And then people can chime in and go into a separate room and have a discussion and come back again. So
Mm.
we've tried to replicate it that way, and it seems to be working. For the time, for in the meantime. But if I'm being totally honest, like it still hasn't fully replaced what the what I'd normally be able to get out of being together in the office, and having that environment, and being able to go and grab a coffee and have a quick chat and come back again, that sort of thing. So yes, it's an interesting one.
Mm.
And you're right, different businesses require different things, and logistics. I mean, how are you going to work from home as a fully
That
as a
or a
logistics
4-day
company? I
week,
mean,
both are quite
that's a tough
challenging.
one. So yeah, 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 that's very true. Hell, you probably need seven, but hey, that's so what's going back to that then? So what are the next steps for you? How excited are you about the expanding the business and hiring
I
and so
think
on?
the
And yeah, tell us
expanding
a
the
bit more
business
about
is
that.
really exciting, stroke nerve wracking in equal measure. Um, I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough last year to go on the Goldman Sachs program, which is the 10KSB, and that's a really, really good
Wow.
program. So if anyone's over the 250,000 revenue, apply. It's worth its weight in gold. Um, both from a sort of structural perspective as far as your business, because you are kind of you pull apart the business and then rebuild it almost, and then have this support around it. And but also the peer group education, which I just think, peer group support, you essentially get a small group, which have been our outsourced peer board, for want of a better expression. Um, so I think that has really helped support
Okay.
me. So in terms of planning for the next growth, but I think the biggest challenges or the biggest movements for us is probably the people side, where I expect, as I say, we're six of us at the moment. I expect us to be nearer upwards of 100 in the next 18 months, which is alarming. Uh, hold
Oh
on to your
gosh.
hat sort of moment.
Wow.
Um,
That's that does sound. Uh, I don't want to say
no,
daunting. I don't want it to
daunting,
be negative, but
daunting.
it does sound like it's going to be
Daunting is
a
right,
very interesting.
absolutely.
Yeah, is that okay? I didn't want to
Um,
be too harsh. Okay.
yeah,
No,
so we've
but it's
got
an
that, and that's
incredible
people
challenge.
coming in at
So
all sorts of different roles,
yeah.
from marketing, sales, tech, the logistics and operations across the entire business. So that's quite interesting. We're launching our MVP on the tech side, so that puts us well and truly in the, shall we say, retail Marcom's tech space, with that product.
Incredible.
Well,
Wow.
no, we can call
Congratulations, you've made
ourselves
it.
a verified tech company. No, so that's quite
Yeah.
interesting, because obviously we're coming at that from hopefully a sustainable sort of progression, development, and growth. So it's not sort of chuck multiple millions at it and hope it sticks. It's very much we're looking at how soon can it wash its face? How can we actually make this work? So that's an interesting one. So I'm really looking forward to that journey. Um, and then we're at the start of rolling out across Transport for London even further. So that's very wide reaching. So I think by the time we finished, it's about 2 billion passengers a year going past our machines. So, and just everything else
Wow, that's
that sort of it
incredible.
comes, that sort of that opportunity, but that ability to get in front and educate and trip and support people to make healthier choices, which is ultimately what we're all about, is how do we make these healthier choices easy and accessible, because then ultimately then we can go and look at how do we work with lower economic groups of people and communities, and how can we do health, really pioneer health equity, which is ultimately what we want to do, is how do you make healthy food affordable and accessible, and wide reaching. So that's sort of, we're starting to see the glimmer of, once you've obviously got all of these things in place and you're progressing and building on that, very much a high growth revenue for the next 5 years. We've sort of set those goals. So profitable, strong EBITDA, and
It's incredible.
some
Wow,
really clear benchmarks. So yeah, it's it's exciting. It's like I'm really
that's so
really
exciting.
like
That's
bouncy, ready
so
to go
exciting.
sort of
Wow.
thing. It's like
Yeah,
everything that has been
I can imagine.
a struggle, those challenges have fed into creating that foundation and the springboard into what we are. So that now, I think particularly with the education thing that I did last year, I've got real clear metrics of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and really adopting that agile methodology across the entire business. That's sort
Mm.
of key to where we want to be. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Sounds like a super exciting journey, and sounds like a lot of challenges coming up, but you're approaching it with a lot of positivity and optimism, and a lot of planning in advance, which is very important too. But yeah, it must be really interesting, and I think expanding the team is usually a big challenge that people come across. And I was having a chat with someone actually I only met recently. I was introduced to him by somebody else, and he was talking about how that in his experience, that's kind of what tends to make to has a
Mm.
big role to play in what makes or breaks a startup, or what makes a startup become a unicorn, an IPO, or not. It's just about all about building out that team and embedding that culture in from the start, right? So that's going to be a really fun journey, I'd imagine, for you, and I'm sure you're looking forward to it. But also, some of these goals and some of these things just sound so exciting because you've been at this for so many years now. You've been doing this for a while, but you've been revenue making, which is very exciting. So that's always a good thing because a lot of startups struggle with that part, and so the fact that you've reached that, but you've making healthy revenue, that's very good. And then working toward profitability at this point is just and you're still talking Series A. That's incredible,
I think it
and
was probably
that's
a
a nice
needs
and very and a
must, sort
healthy
of like
place to
going
be in.
back to
So
I was saying as far as the founders
yeah.
the investor story. We were we presented
Mm,
a conflicted opportunity that was, if you imagine under a sort of VC lens, they get so many presentations, so many decks through that actually
yeah.
the ones that fit the mold are obviously the ones that get the funding the easiest. And the feedback that we kept getting was your
Yeah.
logistics stroke this, your health stroke that, your B2B stroke B2C.
Okay.
And initial feedback was sort of, well, you're spread too thin in our eyes. And the way I'd, even from day one, I remember our vision being enabling healthier choices. That was the sort of key strapline, shall we say, the motivator. So every time I looked at an opportunity, did it fit that? Didn't it fit that? If it did, then we ran with it. But that meant that in the funding environment, we were not cookie cutter startup, and I always remember people saying, fail fast, fail cheap, do this, do that. It didn't work. So we had to be revenue generating. And no, we're not
Mm,
profitable. We've got
mm,
close. We reduced our losses last year by about 35%. So that was really, really strong. We should be profitable
that's great.
next year.
That's really good.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I
But
think
that's what I
that's,
mean is that you're working toward that profitability.
yeah.
A lot of businesses leave it till much
So,
later.
but
So
it's just
yeah,
important for me. It's important that you're
it's really
actually
cool.
a, shall we say, a revenue and profit driven business, because in ultimately, again, coming back to that sort of the circular economy, the only time you're going to be able to do good is if you've got decent profits, because otherwise it should be fed back into the business
Yeah.
to really make sure that you are not putting anything at risk. You've got to have that risk mindset all the time. Like, can anything damage my ultimate goal of what I'm trying to achieve? If you're not profitable, that's a risk. Now, it may not be in the grand scale of, shall we say,
Okay. Yeah.
all these tech
Yeah. Of
stories
course.
where how long did it take Airbnb or Google or anybody else to get profit, but it's
But
different.
but that's a different story, and there are a million failed startups. For every one startup that's amazing and has made it like Airbnb
Exactly.
or Amazon or Google, there are millions that have failed. So to just look at those and think, oh yeah, sure, well, we can be the next Amazon. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe it can be the next Google, maybe it can be the next Netflix. Aim high, definitely work hard to get there. But at the same time, if you're putting all your bets on that,
Exactly.
that's
And I also think
probably
what's
not the
really
best
interesting, I
strategy,
saw
right?
a picture the other
So
day. It was a visual on LinkedIn, and it was when they were first founding Amazon. And you've probably seen it because I've seen it circulate so
mm,
often, but it was, yeah, the state of the office.
well, the
But I
office,
think
yeah.
we've kind of,
So
sorry?
made from doors, right?
Yeah,
Desks were made
probably.
from doors because it
But
was
it was
cheaper,
that we've
right?
done
Yeah.
that whole social media thing
That's
with
yeah,
startup world these days, where we have to be in WeWork or we have to be in this glossy
yeah.
office with every benefit under the sun. But you don't. You have to work
It's
your
so true.
backside off. I remember our first Christmas season with hampers and boxes. I was in the warehouse space that we had, and warehouse being the being a pretty much, it was
The
this
garage at the
tiny,
back and of
tiny
a
little room
yeah.
that we had an office, and it was this tiny little room that they had spare. It was like this sort of community workplace. It was so small that I couldn't actually get anybody to help me pack the boxes. So the products had come in,
Oh
I would
gosh.
pack them, and then I'd pile them in the hallway outside. And I had this most amazing Royal Mail guy, local, who would literally come up 3 times a day, pick them up for me, and take them in. But it's like I'll
Oh,
never
that's so
forget that he
nice.
did this little post guy. It
Wow.
was amazing. But don't underestimate
Oh,
those small beginnings that you go through because I think too often we just go, yay,
yeah,
startup,
yeah,
loads of VC money, let's have everything glossy, let's look like a Google campus on day one. When in actual fact, what you fail to recognize is every single one of those people that we look up to now have been through that, shall we say, ugly stage. And we seem to forget all of that very quickly, and we're
absolutely.
trying.
I
I
mean,
think there's a little bit of that social media sort of picture perfect, life is brilliant, that we don't actually want to share the dirt and the grime and the graft and the ugly offices that have to go before that if you're going to be a sustainable business. Because I would argue that if you go in and make sure everything's glam and perfect on day one, you're probably not going to be in business for very long because you're probably too much on visual rather than what's the heartbeat of the business. What are you actually changing and doing? And what's your purpose and reason for being? Because that's what's going to make you successful.
it's so true. And there is something to be said as well about the kind of people that you'll attract with different environments. If you're very kind of mission driven and you're in a crappy office somewhere, or
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, I'm not saying do it on purpose, but I'm saying that if that is happens to be the case, and you're in that kind of early stages, and you've still got people who are really keen to help and get involved with that, that probably means they're there because they genuinely want to do this and they believe in you and they're,
yeah,
they're there for it. But they're not there for the glam. Let's put it that way. They're there because they actually want to get this thing off the
absolutely.
ground properly. So, yeah. Love it. Sarah, we've been talking for a couple of hours. I absolutely love it. I feel like we could go on for a while, for quite a while. So, I say this to the amazing guests we've had in the past as well. I'm a big believer in having conversations as things grow and develop. So I'm sure we'll
Absolutely.
have more conversations in the future as well. Um, but so inspiring to hear the journey that you've been through from the start of, working on a farm and
With the
seeing
farm.
that,
Yeah, not on
well,
a
not
farm.
working on a farm, sorry, but working with the farm, doing the branding and the marketing. That's too inspiring. Working with the farm in Sub-Saharan Africa as a marketing branding element sort of thing, and helping them with that. But it's just the fact that you saw that kind of environment from the ground up. That's really interesting. And then you're bringing a lot of these values and a lot of these communal values and the journey you've been through and why you started what you're doing now. I think the whole story has been really, really interesting and must have been quite the ride with a lot of ups
Absolutely.
and downs
Yeah.
for you, and I'm sure plenty more to come as well. But it's all exciting stuff.
Yep.
So Healthy Nibbles is where people should go, right? If they want to find out more about this, and if they want to use your incredible products. You mentioned that you do boxes as well now. So thanks for the free
Send
box
me your
actually.
address.
Uh, but you do boxes uh, and everything. We actually will use you. At our company, for the next thing that we have, where we'll give some gifts to our
Cool.
staff. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't use some healthy
Brilliant.
nibbles. I think that sounds like a great idea. So yeah. Is there anything else that you want to mention? Anything exciting that you want to share as well as we kind of
Gosh, so much.
come to a close?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot. I think
We've talked about a lot already, honestly,
more
and
than
there's a lot of exciting
anything
stuff
for
already.
anyone,
So
just stay authentic is my sort of, continual learning, stay authentic and hard work, and it does pay off. And it doesn't always pay off in the way that you would expect it to do either. So be adaptable, agile. That's yeah, all
wow,
little lessons, but they're all little nuggets that you learn as you go along, and some things you can adopt. Um, don't be pressurized by what everybody else is doing. I've raised 50 million in 2 weeks. Yeah, right. Probably not. Or the grandparents with a fund or something. I don't know. Just I think be fair
mm,
on yourself and be true to yourself ultimately, and have a purpose for what you're doing. That's probably yeah. I could yeah just give you lots of little nuggets. But I think they all sort
excellent.
of form
I
into
think
that whole
I think
sort
that's
of
a,
journey and
mm,
experience, and just that lifelong learning, because it doesn't stop.
absolutely. I think it's a really positive thing to end on as well. I think stay authentic. That's a really powerful thing. Easier said than done
I think
sometimes,
maybe the age
but
thing helps,
absolutely
because then you
very
just get, oh,
powerful.
sod it. I don't
And
care what you think about me. I just
yeah,
want to be, we've got this, we redid our
yeah,
values and last year. And one thing that came out was that we wanted to create an environment that welcomed a workforce that was reflective of humanity. And it sounds ridiculously grand, but it was really around that the
wow,
total difference of
okay,
emotional and intellectual, social, cultural differences that come from having a wide range of people working with you across the board. And I think it's that is something that has brought or has come with me from Kenya, because one thing that I did find in Kenya is like a melting pot for the UN. So you get so many different cultures.
okay,
And when I came over here, I found it quite magnolia,
wow,
for want of a better word, as in you didn't really get to
okay,
engage, because there were cultures, there were, different communities from different places in the world or different beliefs, but they all stay so isolated because nobody really
absolutely,
wants to offend in what they say, or to upset, shall we say, whatever
mm,
status quo is going. And I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous, because I got so much value. One of our first friends in Kenya was Indian, and just being exposed to their culture that I'd never experienced before. And the different religion that they had, and the different everything. It was just, they were so welcoming and so embracing in terms of learning from each other. It was just so really, really, really good. But I think it works on that whole, how that feeds into that experience feeds
yeah,
into now is the diversity and inclusion element, that actually we've got so much to learn from
yeah,
people from all over the world in all sorts of groups, whether you are um,
absolutely,
different religions, different food cultures, different country cultures, all of those different things. It's like this melting pot of community. And I think we just need to be a bit more open to all of that, and looking at what, learn from each other and have that safe place. So that is something we're interviewing. When we're interviewing, it's like we're interviewing based on your values. You need to come here and you can have a healthy conflict. You can disagree with one another. You don't spit your dummy out when that's happened. You just dust yourself
yeah,
off and you
that's
go you continue with the work that you're doing, but you realize that you don't necessarily agree with somebody else's viewpoint, but it's just their viewpoint. That's it. It doesn't affect your life. It's just something else to learn from. And that we are absolutely a safe environment and a safe place to work. And I think that for me is probably one of my newer elements and focuses in the business as we sort of actively start that recruitment journey, is that nobody is above, better, below, whatever. That whatever preferences, religion, culture that you come from, it's all welcome. And we want open and safe dialogue. And that's how we're going to be relevant to our customer base, because they're all different.
yeah. Wow, that's so powerful. It's not often that you get the conversation around this being that we're allowed to be different and have different discussions and different points of views, and that be okay with everyone. I sense and I feel like the attempt in being diverse and inclusive nowadays is a lot of
Yeah, to make everyone
beiging
safe.
everything,
It's safe.
if that makes sense. Um, yeah, and I really struggle with that because we're so different as cultures, as humans. I've grown up across two very different sets of cultures,
Mm,
and have got friends from all over the world, from different cultures altogether, and we're gonna disagree on
yeah.
things. That's okay. I don't see a problem with that. Um, so it's really incredible. I think there's a lot that we can all learn from that. I sure will be picking your brain around that a little bit as well, and learning more about how you're actually attempting to do that, because it's quite a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
I feel like, or a tough thing to foster in a team, but very, very,
Well, I feel
very
like we're a live
rewarding
experiment, to be
when
honest.
done.
It's sort
So
of,
so yeah.
I've seen internal bullying, and we've experienced that in the past. I've had days where I've thought this is not a safe
Mm.
environment that I want to be involved in, and it's your own company, so that's a massive red flag, obviously. um, and we're
Pushing it to the limit, that you're trying
Yeah, and I
hard to
think
to to yeah,
where we are
experiment with.
now, the people that created those issues are no longer with us because they didn't obviously align to the values overall.
Yeah, of course.
But now I couldn't be prouder of the group of people that I'm working with. It's just, and it's it is a small team, and there is only six of us. But I think if we can, the
That's
values
amazing.
component of that initial engagement of interviews and interaction is really forming a focus of play a lot more attention to, what would you do if this person was diametrically opposed to your viewpoint. How would you handle it? How would you create that safe environment? What values are important to you? Because ultimately, if we are all committed in creating a safe environment, then and work on that cultural differences, then I think slowly it will emerge into what is hopefully a very strong and stable culture for the business, and that will take the business on its journey as well. It'll be a core component. It'll be something that competitors can't replicate as easy. It'll be a unique point of difference to what we're creating because everybody's of that same mindset. But definitely a live experiment at the moment. So not done.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important that you mentioned everybody's of that
Yeah,
same
different.
mindset,
It's
but they're
very
not of the
different.
same views, right? But yeah,
Yep.
they're different views, different way of doing things, but same mindset, and that's a key thing. Incredible. Inspired by that, I will go away and try to incorporate some of those things myself in my
No
life
worries.
as
Thank you
well.
for your
Generally,
time.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here with us.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for the
likewise.
conversation. I really enjoyed it. Really, really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to speaking again soon. Thank you. I'm glad you did. So yeah, we'll keep you
Super.
posted with anything else, and we'll go from there. We hope that you liked the episode. This podcast was sponsored by QFind, a hiring platform that matches candidates with jobs and employers based on many factors that ensure longer term alignment. It goes way beyond package and salaries and takes into account much, much more than that to ensure a happy working environment for everybody. To find out more about this podcast and to see further releases, we'll be announcing them at the @qfinds.io Instagram page, as well as on the qfinds.io website, as well as from my own personal Instagram page and my own personal LinkedIn. All information you need that we spoke about in the podcast or this information mentioned here will be mentioned below in the description. So take a look, visit those links, and if you like anything or want to get in touch, please do. And lastly, stay tuned for more. Have an amazing week ahead of you.